So I have one more here for you of Trump's interview with Stuart Varney. Trump's asked directly about climate change, which, by the way, I'm surprised Stuart Varney asked this question. Never in a million years would I have guessed that Stuart Varney would ask a question, direct question about climate change. And what you're going to see here is Trump's brain malfunctions. It melts. It drips out of his ears. He goes back to his standard, really dumb talking points. Let's watch and I'll react.
What about
Created by somebody
change?
that I don't even think ever took a course in the environment.
Is the climate Is the climate changing because of human activity?
In my opinion, you have a thing called weather, and you go up and you go down. If you look into the 1920s, they were talking about global freezing. Okay, in other words, the globe was going to freeze. And then they go global warming. Then they couldn't use that because the temperatures were actually quite cool, and many different things. So now they just talk about climate change. The climate's always been changing.
There are so many parts of that I love. They were talking about global freezing. In other words, you have a globe that's going to freeze. You just said the same thing. It's not in other words. There were no in other words. There's global freezing, which means the globe was going to freeze. That's not in other words, dog. That's not in other words. And then he goes, he's asked about climate change. He says, in my opinion, you have a thing called weather. That's not an opinion. There is a thing called weather. And it goes up and it goes down. It goes up, it goes down. Oh, God. It's almost like he's proud at the fact that he never really read any of the relevant scientific literature or even articles on the science. It's like he proudly is like, I'm just going to give the dumb guy reflexive reactionary take here. Climate change? Well, the climate is always changing. Now, by the way, this global freezing thing, so he got a number of things are wrong about it. Number one, he said in the 1920s they were talking about, it wasn't the 1920s, it was the 1970s. And it was never really based on the science. So if you Google global cooling, Wikipedia page, pull that right up. It says global cooling was a conjecture, especially during the 1970s, of imminent cooling of the Earth, culminating in a period of extensive glaciation due to the cooling effects of aerosols and orbital forcing. Some press reports in the 1970s speculated about continued cooling. These did not accurately reflect the scientific literature of the time, which was generally more concerned with warming from an enhanced greenhouse effect. So, there's that. It's not too much of a surprise that with us pumping all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you're going to have the enhanced greenhouse effect. This is very scientifically well understood that tends to change the climate in very destructive ways. You have more extreme weather events. Some areas are more drought prone. Some areas get too much rain. You have the glaciers melting in Antarctica. I mean, I just saw a study the other day. It was 70 degrees above normal in Antarctica the other day. 70 degrees. Now, again, that's just one little data point, but they've done what's called a meta-analysis on this, which is look at all of the verified scientific literature and try to crunch the numbers and figure out what's really going on here. And in no uncertain terms, the climate is warming. The climate is changing. In every way, it's worse than what the worst case scenario was predicted as. I mean, think about that for a second. It's always worse than the worst case scenario. And so look, there's some reporting that the Middle East is going to be uninhabitable by a certain date in the future. So there's another mass refugee crisis. There's going to be wars over water. That seems important. And it's just, he just swats it all aside. There's a thing called weather, and you go up. In my opinion, there's a thing called weather, and it goes up and it goes down. And there's global freezing, which in other words means global freezing, which in other words means global freezing, which in other words means the globe is going to freeze. Oh, man. And again, this guy is probably the favorite to be our next president. More cash on hand than Democrats and Republicans combined, tied with Biden in the polls right now. Pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, of course. Not good, man. Not good. And you get the sense even Stuart Varney, as he's listening to that, is like, ugh. I think Stuart Varney's a climate science denier too, but even he is probably thinking, dude, dress it up a little bit. You got to give me slightly more intellectual arguments than this. This fucking stupid shooting from the hip, proudly anti-intellectual take. And now is the last time to be saying stuff like this, obviously. Why? Because currently we are, Russia gives a lot of oil and natural gas to Europe. Europe is very reliant on that. Now, of course, there's a conflict in Ukraine. There's the war in Ukraine, and we're sanctioning Russian oil and gas. That's about 8% of our market, but it makes up about half of Germany's market. So there's this like oil crisis in a sense. And so you got to sort of make up the gap in the short run, but then in the long run, the real solution is, well, let's just get off of the oil so we don't have these unholy alliances, whether it be with Saudi Arabia or Russia or whoever, and become energy independent. Now, people say, well, we should make the U.S. energy independent. Okay, we already are the number one producer of natural gas in the world. Number one. Problem is, that's ExxonMobil's and Chevron's and the oil companies. That's not the people's oil and gas. It should be. I'm in favor of nationalizing it, and then we could, instead of exporting all of it to make more money, we could use it domestically. I am in favor of that. So, but we already are the number one producer, so in a sense we could be energy independent. We're not because of capitalism and the way the global economy works and that we outsource all of it, and it's more about profit than anything else. And so I would definitely nationalize it, but then at the same time you do that, you have to go all in on getting off of the sauce. You have to do it. There's no way around it. And unfortunately, at a moment when that should be the primary conversation, it's not at all. And you still have these idiots going right back to their standard well of talking points where they deny climate change. They act like it's just the weather. It goes up and down. And actually global cooling was the thing everybody was worried about. So it's nothing. No, it is definitely something. Nationalize the oil industry. Use it more domestically. Stop relying on Saudi Arabia. Stop relying on Russia. Stop relying on all these other places. And then also do that Green New Deal to get us green and renewable technology to make it so that whatever it is, you get the breakthroughs, you get the new patents, you get the wind, you get the solar, you get the nuclear, you get the geothermal, you get the thorium, whatever it might be. So, oh, Donald, what are we going to do with you? Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.